Today we're going to turn a cheap $35 Raspberry Pi into a DNS sinkhole capable of stopping any malicious site on this episode of Cyberweapons Lab. The PiHole is yet another Raspberry Pi project, this time focused on network-wide ad blocking. It's able to achieve this by acting as the DNS server for your home network. Now, if you're not familiar with what a DNS server does, it's that handy server that translates between a URL like google.com and an IP address which your computer needs for networking, such as 8.8.8.8. Now, by acting as a middleman between your normal DNS provider, such as Google or Cloudflare, and your home network, it's able to impose a blacklist. Now, that blacklist usually involves ads for the majority of PiHole users. However, what we're going to focus on today is how you can instead use blacklists that are focused on things such as phishing websites, or even the servers that a malicious program might phone home to. Now, if this sounds interesting to you, all you'll need to do to get started is have a Raspberry Pi, such as this one. You can have a full Raspberry Pi or a Pi Zero. The Pi Zero might just be a little slower, depends on how much network traffic you have. You'll also need a network cable so you can Ethernet it in, power cable, SD card, and whatever adapter or dongle you need to plug into your computer. If you want links to those equipment or you need more detailed written instructions, follow the link in the description below to the article. Otherwise, let's get started. All right, to get started, you're going to want to pull up my article linked in the description below. The main reason I say this is because later on I'm going to have a bunch of links and things that are easier to copy and paste, so just make your life easier. So to get started, what we're going to need to do is have a single board computer, such as the Raspberry Pi, and put an OS on it. Any OS will work. So I usually like going and doing Raspbian, just because that's designed for the Raspberry Pi. So there's a link here. You can also just Google it. Go get the Raspbian Lite. As far as Buster or any of the other versions, it doesn't really matter. The reason I say Lite is because we're not going to be actually using the Raspberry Pi with a monitor or any GUI interfaces on it. We don't really need any of that, so why download it to begin with? So download the zip file, do a torrent if you prefer, and then take your favorite program for flashing software. I like using Etcher, but you can use any other software. So you'll open up Etcher and you'll select your Raspbian image. You'll select a target, which is your micro SD card, and then you'll flash. It'll take a couple of minutes, it'll flash it, and then it'll verify. Once it's done that, it'll eject the micro SD card. So you're going to need to physically unplug the SD card and then plug it back in. Now, once you do that, you're going to want to open up the SD card. It'll be a boot folder. And in that boot folder, you're going to want to put two files. A blank file, which is just labeled SSH with no file extension. The reason we do this is this will enable us to use SSH to connect to the Raspberry Pi remotely. If we didn't do this, we would have to plug in the Raspberry Pi to a monitor and go through all of that, and doing it through SSH is just so much simpler. Additionally, the other file you might consider is the WPA supplicant file. Essentially, this is the file that gives the Raspberry Pi your Wi-Fi credentials. Now, it's easy and useful for setup, but as far as the long-term solution, I highly recommend that you actually use Ethernet, because Ethernet can't be de-auth from ESP32. Microwave isn't going to interfere with it. Like, there's so many fewer things that can go wrong when it's Etherneted in, so just do that. Now, if you do want to use Wi-Fi to set it up, or for whatever reason, maybe as a backup, you'll make this WPA supplicant file, WPA supplicant.config, and it's just a text document, and you copy and paste this in, change your Wi-Fi name and password. Now, once you've done that, you want to scan your network. Well, first you want to plug in your Raspberry Pi Ethernet cable, plug in the micro SD card and power, and give it a second or two to connect to the network. And then you want to scan the network. I like using Phishing. It's an app. Just download it. Otherwise, find the IP address, pull up your router admin page that will also have the IP address of all the devices on the network. Either way, you just need to get the IP address so that we can access the Raspberry Pi. So pull up a terminal. You could also use the Chrome extension that allows you to SSH. Either way. So when you have your terminal open, you'll type in SSH and then pi at, and then the IP address 192.168, whatever your IP address is. It might be 10.0.0 something, depending on how yours is set up. Then you'll be asked about a key, and most importantly, the password. The password is Raspberry. As you can see here, I'm already connected to my Raspberry Pi. So once you've gone through that, we can actually download the PiHole software. Now, there's two ways you can do this. You can do this one-liner curl command, or you can git clone it. Now, technically, the most secure way to do this is to git clone, because with GitHub, you can look at all the code and stuff before it executes. But, I mean, honestly, how many of us are actually going to do that? If you are concerned, you can look over the code and do that. Otherwise, just make your life easier and copy and paste the curl command. And essentially, this is just going to one-shot the whole installation process. Now, I'm not going to run this command because I already did that a second ago, and it takes a second to download. So I definitely recommend getting some coffee while it goes through. Just be aware that you will get a couple of screens. You should just okay your way through basically all of them. The only ones to look out for are the ones that ask about interface you might want to use. So that's where you would pick the Ethernet interface. Also, you can select your upstream DNS provider. That's the server that your PiHole is going to send all of its DNS requests to. Google is a good choice. The one I personally prefer is Cloudflare, which is an option. You'll just have to arrow key down and click enter to select it. But if you want to change your mind later or do anything like that, that's something that's very easy to change in the GUI website interface that we'll talk about later. So you'll go through, they'll offer you some lists to start off with. You can just keep all those, enter to continue. You'll also have some privacy settings. I prefer to log everything because I love information, but if you want to hide or disable some of the statistics and stuff, that's definitely something you can do in that interface. Once it's finally installed, you'll be left with this page here. Definitely don't close it out because it'll have this password here, which you need to copy and paste. Now, once we do have our terminal open, we can go ahead and do a few final configuration things that aren't covered in the normal configuration, such as PiHole-A-P. Now, what this command allows us to do is to change the password of the administrative panel website for the PiHole on our local network. So that's that weird password that I had you copy and paste before. So if you don't want to remember that, or you know you're going to forget it eventually in the future and don't want to use it in a password manager or anything, this is how you change that password. So just type in your new password twice and you have that set. Now, something else you want to change a password for is the Pi itself. So that password is just for that administration panel. This password is still Raspberry, which is the default, and anyone that actually gets access to your network could easily guess that and change this or fuck around with your PiHole. So definitely want to change this password as well. So passwd, and that's going to ask for your current password. So there you go. And they are very serious about you picking a pretty good password. But regardless, once you change it, you can clear all that. And lastly, we're going to want to change the host name and host. So essentially why we want to do this is because I'm assuming you're going to have multiple Raspberry Pi projects, or even if you have other projects with other single board computers that you might be installing Raspbian or whatever. When you look at them on the network, you want to be able to easily distinguish them. So currently this is just called Raspberry Pi or something along that line. So we can take sudo nano and then host name and run that. And that will allow us to change this to something like PiHole, which you can see I've already done here. And then Control X, Y, and enter to save that. And then also we're going to want to do the same with the host file, which you can see down here I've already done. And remember, you can use your arrow keys to navigate around. You can really name it whatever you want, just something that's easy for you to remember what it is. Now that we've actually got all our little configuration stuff done, we can pretty much close out of that SSH terminal, and we can actually go to the web interface, which is now up and running. So how we do that is we'll go over here in Firefox, Chrome, whatever, and you can start typing in the IP address. For me, it's this, but it might be slightly different for you. And then -admin. And you'll see a little login over here. Let's just show you what that looks like. Login. And then this is where you type in that password. And this is really the beautiful administration panel for the PiHole. And this is where we can start seeing statistics. I don't currently have this linked to my router, so we don't have a lot of requests coming through here. But you can see, like, it's a healthy little list that we get started off with. So the first thing you'll want to do is actually open up your router now, and you can use Phishing to find that IP address. If you don't already know it, it's probably something along the lines of 192.168.1.1 or 10.0.0.1. And then hopefully you remember your administrator password, something, it's usually admin, or admin, no password, or admin password. And in there, you'll have a DNS setting, which you want to change to this IP address. So that means that the entire network will be looking at the PiHole for its DNS request. Additionally, you can go through each individual device. So each computer, smart TV, smartphone, anything like that. And usually there's also a setting there where you can change the DNS settings. But as far as your home Wi-Fi network is concerned, changing the DNS settings on your router should be good enough, because essentially that router is issuing that to each device, hey, this is the DNS to use. Now, something else you want to look into using is DHCP. You can find these settings under Settings, DHCP, in both your router and the PiHole. So if you're not familiar with what DHCP does, it's the service that issues IP addresses to devices on the network. Now, it's useful to have your PiHole act as the DHCP because essentially it has more information to work with about what each device is and what it's doing, etc. It definitely makes troubleshooting certain issues a lot easier. For example, if you get a little overzealous with your blacklist and you're having your Xbox not come up with the achievements or some weird API is broken, it's a lot easier to figure it out when your PiHole is acting as the DHCP. So what you're going to want to do is open up the router, and you'll look for the DHCP settings, maybe under advanced, under Wi-Fi. Different routers have it in different places. You'll want to disable it on the router first. That's very important. You do not want to enable it here on the PiHole until you've disabled it on the router. The reason for that is if you have them acting in tandem simultaneously, then you potentially have IP collisions that'll happen. It'll kick a device off the network, or two devices will get the same IP address and just not be able to access the network. Very nasty. Just save yourself a headache. Turn it off on the router, save the setting, refresh it, maybe even reboot the router if you want to play extra safe. Then come here, then click DHCP server enabled, save the settings. It'll give you some warnings here as well. Once all of that's done, we can really start adding to the block lists. Now, these are some of the default ones they come with here. If you go back over to my article, you'll find that I have already provided you some links to some good block lists here. So for example, we have fireblog.net. It's got whole lists here, and it even sorts them out. So, suspicious lists, advertising, tracking and telemetry. So definitely if you want to regain some privacy, block AdWords or Google Analytics, stuff like that. For our concerns here, malicious links, all this is good. You just copy and paste it over, and then we should save that. And it'll take a second, but as you see, that added a whole bunch. And let's go back to our dashboard real quick, and maybe that didn't update quite so well, but we should see that number jump up a lot as it gets those block lists in place. Yeah, we should save an update. It may take a while to do this, particularly if you do like I just did and copy big chunks of block lists. And there we go, it updated. Let's check the dashboard now and see. Yeah, that's much more what I expected to see. So we're now up to 400,000 different URLs that are blocked. And this isn't the only website I have here. Another one I really like is Blacklist Project. So again, it has them broken up into different ways. So definitely want to get the malware, fraud, phishing. Some of these might not be as useful, but ransomware, spam and scam could definitely be useful. You could even use this as a bit of a parental tool if you wanted to, and block certain types of websites. Again, or mess with your roommates. I just highly caution against that. I would definitely increase your block list a little chunk at a time. The last thing you want is your roommate barging in at midnight demanding to know why certain websites aren't loading. So trust me, just add a couple chunks at a time. And if things that you normally go to aren't working properly, then what you'll want to do is you'll want to go over here and you can see the query log, and you'll be able to see the websites that are queried, and you can add them to the blacklist or also add them to the whitelist. So whitelist being websites you absolutely want to improve. So I definitely recommend our own website, Wonder How To. You could also do YouTube, but none of these blacklists are going to block YouTube. And a couple other websites with lists are the Zeltzer.com, malicious IP. And then also Wikipedia has a pretty surprisingly good list. A whole boatload really to go through here if you really want to go crazy. Also, the community is really helpful on Reddit r PiHole. You can find lists that other people created, like this one. It's got 2.5 million lists. Definitely something you want to look into. And that's basically all you really got to do. Over time, you'll see the dashboard. You'll get a whole bunch of settings. Not settings. statistics that you can look at here, pretty graphs, and so on. And then you can really dive into the settings more if you want to. You can look at the things like use DNSSEC. There's really no reason not to do this. The only thing that you might want to check is your VPN settings. With all of this, you want to check and make sure that you're using the PiHole DNS. A lot of VPNs like PIA will come with their own DNS server baked in, and that's a setting you'll have to go in and disable. You can also look into DNS over HTTPS because, believe it or not, DNS requests are still done over HTTP. So there's all sorts of things like that you can look into. Those will all be covered in the PiHole docs, and if you tell us in the comments below, we can do a guide on how to do that sort of stuff as well.
If you like this tutorial, be sure to check out our website, where we have hundreds of free articles and videos, as well as premium paid content like the Ethical Hacking Certification Bundle, which features pen testing with OWASP ZAP, WordPress hacking and hardening, and the CompTIA Cybersecurity Analyst Prep course. Check out the link in the description below.
The PiHole is a pretty nifty little tool. However, it does have one limitation in its current configuration, and that is its reliance on an upstream DNS provider, such as Google or Cloudflare. Now, the problem here is that every time it needs an IP, it's pinging these servers, these upstream DNS providers, and they're giving you the information. So potentially you don't trust those providers, or potentially, however unlikely, they could be hacked and their DNS logs could be stolen, or the DNS cache could be poisoned. Now, if those are major concerns for you, then you might want to look into something called a recursive DNS server. Now, the PiHole is capable of doing this, but it's a little outside of the scope of the video today. So definitely look into that if that's a concern of yours. If you want more information on the PiHole, check out the link in the description below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have questions or ideas for future videos, you can ask me on Twitter at @the_Hoid. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.